What if everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt, its gods, its tombs, its golden certainties, was a beautifully carved lie? Beneath this sand, behind the hieroglyphs, lie 49 mysteries that defy logic, unsettle history, and whisper that something deeper has always been watching. From lost cities to impossible engineering, this is not the Egypt of textbooks. This is the Egypt that refuses to explain itself. So light a candle, lock the door, and prepare to descend into 2 hours of ancient enigmas that even the pharaohs couldn't solve. Before we open the first tomb, quick question. Where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Midnight in Manila? Lunch break in London? Wherever and whenever you are, welcome. If ancient mysteries, cursed history, and unresolved riddles are your thing, hit subscribe. This channel's built for the curious, the skeptical, and the slightly sleep-deprived. Let's get into it. The destroyed Pyramid of Hetepheres. There once stood a pyramid that may have outshone even the mighty monuments at Giza, a structure so elegant, so perfectly placed, so geometrically smug, it made Khufu's masterpiece look like a poorly stacked pile of sandstone regrets. But today, at Abu Rawash, you'll find nothing more than a gravel pit, a few leftover blocks, and a whisper of ancient humiliation. The remains of Hetepheres' pyramid, the architectural equivalent of a forgotten birthday cake someone sat on. Hetepheres, son of Khufu, decided to build his pyramid somewhere other than Giza, an unusual move that already raised eyebrows in the royal family WhatsApp group. He picked a lonely stretch of desert high up on a hill, perhaps to be closer to the sun god Ra, or perhaps just to avoid the HOA fees near the Sphinx. And for a brief, shimmering moment in time, his pyramid reportedly gleamed with red granite casing, polished so smooth it could reflect the soul, or at least the judgmental glare of the god Osiris. Then, as if Egypt itself got bored of him, it vanished. Not figuratively, physically, like someone rage deleted him from history. The site today is shredded. The granite is gone. The limestone casing evaporated. What remains is a glorified construction site that looks like it lost a fight with an earthquake and then a second fight with looters. Why? Some say Roman quarrymen cannibalized it, turning the pyramid into columns for bathhouses no one remembers. Others blame early Muslims or local villagers looking for building materials. But the most poetic theory? Hetepheres was hated, as in deeply unpopular. So unpopular, his descendants may have dismantled his tomb out of spite. That's like your grandkids tearing down your tombstone because you were a bad tipper. The tragedy is, Hetepheres' pyramid might have been the first to truly honor Ra with its orientation and design ushering in solar theology and a new phase of divine architectural branding. But instead of legacy, he got erased. Which means the most dazzling pyramid in Egypt might now be holding up a poorly restored staircase in someone's Cairo apartment. And speaking of misplaced Egyptian marvels, the Sphinx claws found in Israel. There's something almost romantic about a mystery that begins with a pair of ancient paws, hundreds of miles from their body, like a 4,000-year-old jigsaw puzzle tossed across 2 countries by a careless god. That's exactly what archaeologists found at Tel Hazor, Israel. The massive paws of a sphinx, carved in true Egyptian style, resting casually where no sphinx had any business being. It gets better. The sphinx fragments were carved with the name of Pharaoh Menkaure, you know, the guy whose pyramid is the smallest of the 3 at Giza, but probably had the biggest insecurity complex. So, how did his guardian feline end up beheaded and dismembered in the middle of Canaan? No one knows, and honestly, that makes it better. Some scholars believe it was a diplomatic gift, because nothing says peace treaty like giving someone your sacred lion's feet. Others think it was stolen, dragged across deserts, and forgotten in the chaos of conquest. Still, others wonder if Tel Hazor once housed a local cult obsessed with all things Egyptian. The kind of people who'd build a fake Egyptian temple just to impress their neighbors and one-up their cousins in Jerusalem. The strangeness only deepens when you realize this isn't an isolated incident. Egyptian artifacts have been found sprinkled across the Levant like lost luggage. Obelisks, statues, scribbles on stone blocks that read like half-baked fan fiction, all found far from the Nile. Did Egypt export its gods wholesale? Did people just casually walk off with sacred monuments like they were potted plants? Either way, there's something undeniably awkward about Menkaur's Sphinx sitting in pieces so far from home, like finding a Ferrari chassis in the Himalayas, and no one knows how it got there, or why. But while we're here, admiring Egypt's ancient road trip souvenirs, let's peer into a temple that might just prove ancient Egyptians were either electrical engineers or pranksters way ahead of their time. The purpose of the Dendera light depictions. If you ever wanted to see a 2,000-year-old temple that looks like someone snuck a flashlight into the carvings, welcome to the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, carved into the stone walls like a cryptic PowerPoint. For aliens are what appear to be giant, bulb-shaped objects, complete with filaments and cables, and some dudes standing around like they're about to shout, "Someone flip the switch!" Naturally, this has sparked the question no Egyptologist really wants to hear at a dinner party. Did ancient Egyptians have light bulbs? The mainstream answer is, of course, no. The so-called Dendera light is just a harmless depiction of a lotus flower giving birth to a snake, symbolizing life and fertility. You know, totally normal symbolic art. Nothing to see here. Except, it kind of looks exactly like a Crookes tube, an early form of light bulb developed in the 19th century. There's even what looks like a power cable running into a mysterious box. Some fringe theorists, sipping their conspiracy wine, have suggested ancient Egypt had harnessed electricity or was at least aware of high-voltage symbolism. Could this be suppressed tech, lost knowledge, or the result of thousands of stonemasons working overtime with too much myth and not enough management? Of course, if the Egyptians really had working electric lighting, you'd think we'd find a few more extension cords, or light switches, or literally anything suggesting they weren't just really into snakes and glowworms. What's even weirder, some of the temple chambers show no signs of soot, no blackened ceilings from torches. So how were they lighting those deep, dark halls during decoration? Mirrors? Possibly. Magic light beams? Also possibly. They were ancient Egyptians, after all. Their job was to confuse future civilizations. Maybe it's just art. Maybe it's a cosmic joke. Maybe they invented electricity, used it for about 15 minutes, and then decided it was better to die in darkness than explain circuits to the priesthood. And yet, if weird carvings aren't enough for you, what about a colossal underground structure that Herodotus claimed made the pyramids look quaint? A place so baffling, it might not even exist, but somehow still haunts archaeologists to this day. The mystery of the lost labyrinth of Giza. Picture this. You've made the exhausting pilgrimage to the pyramids, expecting to be dazzled by blocks, sand, and the slow realization that ancient Egypt was basically a giant stone-based overcompensation project. But then, a tour guide leans in and whispers, This is nothing. There used to be a labyrinth, a real one, with 3,000 rooms, underground. And just like that, the pyramids feel like the world's most overhyped appetizer. We're talking about the lost labyrinth of Giza, or, more accurately, the labyrinth near Giza, since its exact coordinates seem to exist somewhere between archaeological speculation and Greek fever dream. Herodotus, that lovable gossip of antiquity, swore it existed. He described it as a sprawling, two-level complex, so vast and beautiful that the pyramids, yes, the pyramids couldn't hold a candle to it. Columns, courtyards, chambers, full of hieroglyphs and divine secrets. It was allegedly used as an administrative center, a ceremonial zone, and probably the world's worst place to get lost while looking for a restroom. But here's the kicker. No one has ever found it. Not fully. In 2008, a geophysical survey around the Hawara region picked up what looked like a massive, rectangular stone formation buried beneath the sand right where the labyrinth was rumored to be. But after that, silence. Bureaucratic red tape, academic squabbling, and the always convenient phrase, "More research is needed." Some say it was intentionally buried. Others say it collapsed into the waterlogged earth. A few suggest it was dismantled, like Hetepheres pyramid, to keep its secrets from falling into unworthy hands, or worse, tourists. It's either the greatest archaeological find waiting to happen, or the longest-running prank in Greco-Egyptian history. But whether it's myth or mystery, one thing is certain. Herodotus was either the best liar of the 5th century BCE or the last person to see something no one was ever meant to find. And if that sprawling stone basement full of forgotten gods and office memos really exists, it could change everything we know about Egypt's bureaucracy, religion, and sense of interior design. Which brings us neatly to another kind of missing Egyptian. The ones who were supposed to be buried like gods but left behind tombs without kings. The absence of a pharaoh in some royal tombs. Ancient Egypt had a lot of obsessions: cats, death, more cats, and building stone structures just so they could fill them with food, statues, and extremely dead relatives. But at the heart of it all was the tomb. The tomb was everything. Your permanent address in the afterlife. Your spiritual resume. Your stone-walled LinkedIn profile. So when a royal tomb is found without a royal corpse, the Egyptology crowd starts sweating. Because it's not just confusing, it's insulting. You don't throw 1,000 workers at carving intricate hieroglyphs about your divine power, only to check in a few centuries later and realize your name's not even on the sarcophagus. Some royal tombs are strangely empty. Others seem unfinished, elaborate entrances leading to shallow chambers, as if the builders ran out of time, or patience, or maybe just funding. In some cases, we know the pharaoh existed. There are inscriptions, statues, coins, but their final resting place? A giant question mark. Were the tombs looted? Maybe. But looters usually leave behind evidence of their bad manners, broken jars, overturned lids, and signs of a hurried spiritual eviction. In some of these cases, there's nothing, just silence. Like the pharaoh was never buried at all. Take Akhenaten, the heretic king who made a theological U-turn and worshipped the sun disk Aten. He built an entirely new city, moved the capital, and rewrote the religious code. But his tomb? Mysterious, fragmented, possibly desecrated, and where he actually ended up? Still debatable. Or consider Nefertiti, one of the most iconic figures in ancient Egyptian art. Her bust is world famous. Her death? A total enigma. No confirmed tomb, no confirmed mummy, just a suspicious gap in the royal records and some tantalizing whispers behind hidden doors in the Valley of the Kings. Theories abound. Some believe royal tombs were hidden so well even modern archaeologists can't find them. Others think certain pharaohs were denied traditional burial rites for political reasons, cancelled in the afterlife before it was trendy. But maybe the most unsettling theory is this: they were never buried. Not properly. Not with the expected fanfare. And if the dead don't rest where they're supposed to, then who or what is haunting the empty stone halls today? And speaking of mysterious absences, let's talk about something Egypt had in abundance but never quite explained. Massive stones cut with impossible precision, and not a single manual left behind. The precise techniques for cutting and moving massive stones. Imagine being a 25th century engineer with access to lasers, cranes, and AI modeling, then getting absolutely smoked by a civilization that used copper chisels and determination. That's the psychological damage Egypt does to modern science. We're not just talking about the Great Pyramid's blocks, which are massive, yes, but child's play compared to the real beasts. There are obelisks made from single pieces of granite weighing over 300 tons. Statues of Ramses so large, they look like gods who forgot how to sit down. Temples that required entire mountains to be rearranged. And every single one of those stones was carved, dragged, floated, hoisted, and stacked, using methods no one can conclusively explain. Let's break that down. The quarrying of granite, especially in places like Aswan, requires cutting into some of the hardest rock on Earth. Ancient tools, copper and dolerite, which sounds less like a cutting tool and more like a disappointing Pokemon. Yet somehow, the cuts are smooth, uniform, machine-like, and in some places, there are curved cuts, spiral bores. Evidence of precision that modern engineers can't replicate without power tools. Transporting them? The Nile was used, sure, but how do you get a 400-ton statue onto a barge without turning it into modern art? Some say sand, sledges, and water. Others point to rolling logs and lubricated tracks. A few whisper about lost technologies, anti-gravity, sound, resonance, alien forklifts. And okay, that last one is a bit much, but honestly, less ridiculous than imagining 5,000 dudes pushing a 300-ton rock uphill while being shouted at by a man in eyeliner. It's not just how they move the stones, but how they align them. Some structures are so precisely placed that they match cardinal directions within a fraction of a degree. Astronomical alignments, magnetic harmonics, even acoustic properties have been observed. These weren't random stacks. They were deliberate, mathematical, and here's the spooky part, still standing after 4,000 years. So how did they do it? No blueprints survive. No stonework for dummies carved into papyrus. Just the stones themselves, standing there, silently judging our cranes and concrete mixers. And perched nearby in the sand, waiting to be misunderstood, is one small wooden object that may or may not be the oldest glider humanity ever built, the Saqqara bird. In 1898, amidst the chaos of uncovering ancient tombs and carting out enough artifacts to confuse 3 museums and a small conspiracy subreddit, archaeologists found a bird, not a real one, a wooden model. Wings outstretched, smooth, aerodynamic body, small tail fin, simple, elegant, confusing as hell. This little artifact, later dubbed the Saqqara bird, was dated to around 200 BCE. Just another toy, some said. A ceremonial decoration, a child's lost hobby. But then someone squinted at it and said, "Wait, that kind of looks like a glider." And the chaos began. Its shape is eerily modern symmetrical wings, vertical stabilizer, lightweight, no legs, no feet, no perch. You'd think it was meant to fly. And naturally, the ancient astronaut crowd had a field day. It was an aircraft prototype, an ancient drone, proof of forgotten aviation technology. A piece of evidence so inconvenient, it was quickly shoved into the miscellaneous wooden stuff section of the museum. Of course, mainstream scholars waved the accusations off with the universal scholarly hand gesture for, "Please stop." They insist it's a bird, a symbolic falcon, maybe sacred to Horus. Maybe it was used in ritual. Maybe it just looks aerodynamic because it was carved by someone with good taste and a love for symmetry. You know, aesthetics, not flight dynamics. But let's entertain the madness. Let's say the ancient Egyptians toyed with basic flight concepts. Would they really carve a miniature model for fun? Test it in secret? Whisper to each other about the winged ones who brought knowledge from the stars? Or maybe it really was just a toy, a child's object lost to time. One more piece of accidental intrigue, warped into legend by bored modern minds desperate for mystery. But either way, it forces us to ask, how much do we project onto the past when it doesn't come with a label? Still, for a wooden carving that fits in your palm, it's caused a surprisingly large number of late-night arguments between engineers and Egyptologists. And if you think a toy bird is confusing, Wait until you see the carvings at Abydos, where the walls seem to display helicopters, submarines, and possibly a UFO or two. That's not symbolic. That's just awkward. The meaning and function of the Abydos list anomalies. Let's walk into the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. At first, it looks like any other tribute to divine egomania columns, hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads giving pharaohs cryptic finger points. But then you look up at one panel, squint a little, and there it island. A helicopter. Next to it, what looks like a tank. Below it, a submarine. And maybe, if you're especially sleep-deprived, a futuristic blimp or death ray. For decades, this one section of overlapping hieroglyphs has haunted Egyptology forums, late-night cable television, and the stranger corners of the internet. The so-called Abydos anomalies look less like a religious scene and more like the script of Star Wars, Nile Edition. So what's the official explanation? According to experts, it's just a palimpsest, a case of the original carvings being plastered over and recarved centuries later. The erosion of both layers left behind an accidental optical illusion. The helicopter? Really just a weird combo of the words for divine platform, to rise, and fish. We're paraphrasing. But that's never stopped the theorists. To them it's clear. The ancient Egyptians had access to futuristic knowledge. Either they were being visited by time travelers, or they had remembered something long forgotten, a golden age, when man flew, floated, and maybe even fought wars using craft that look suspiciously like what we'd design on a military contract today. Or, of course, maybe they were just carving abstract glyphs that we modern brains desperately want to translate into machines. Maybe the truth isn't in the stone, but in our need for the past to be more like us. Still, it's hard to unsee it. Once you spot the helicopter, it refuses to be just a coincidence. It taunts you. It dares you to believe. And in the same temple, another mystery quietly lingers, less flashy, but just as unresolved. Why did the Nubian pharaohs, who embraced Egypt's grandeur with their own pyramids, suddenly stop building them altogether? The abrupt end of pyramid building in Nubia. For over 1,000 years after Egypt's golden pyramid age had ended, the Nubians said, "Hold my beer," and started building their own. Dozens of pyramids, steep, elegant, and clustered like forgotten chess pieces, dot the desert of what is now northern Sudan. These were the burial monuments of the Kushite kings and queens, rulers of the kingdom of Meroe and Napata. In some ways, their pyramids are even more fascinating. Tighter angles, smaller footprints, vibrant artwork. Egypt had passed the torch, and Nubia ran with it. And then, they just stopped. No dramatic collapse, no obvious invasion, no fiery destruction by outsiders who hated geometry. The building simply ceased, like someone flipped a switch labeled triangle enthusiasm to off. Why? Some say the economic foundation eroded, trade routes shifted, wealth declined, and building pyramids got too expensive. But let's be real, these weren't skyscrapers. These were symbolic. You don't give up your afterlife real estate just because the gold shipment's a bit late. Others argue religion changed. The cult of Amun may have lost influence, and new beliefs brought new burial preferences. Perhaps rock-cut tombs or simpler graves felt more appropriate. Still, to abandon such a distinctive practice so abruptly feels deliberate. Could there have been internal conflict? A reform movement? An ideological rejection of the old ways? Or maybe pyramid building was seen as too Egyptian at a certain point. A cultural cosplay the Nubians eventually shrugged off as yesterday's fashion. Another theory, of course, is environmental. The desert sands shifted, floods encroached, construction became impossible, but again no clear smoking chisel, just a sudden absence where there had once been legacy, pride, and an unmistakable silhouette against the sky. What's left today are the empty shells of ambition. Pyramids half buried in sand, weathered by time, and overlooked by most of the world. They remind us not just of what civilizations build, but what they stop building, and why that silence can be louder than stone. And speaking of silence, how about erosion patterns that scream water in a place that's had none for millennia? Let's head back to the Sphinx, whose body may be whispering a story far older than Egypt itself. The unusual wear patterns on the Great Sphinx. For thousands of years, the Great Sphinx of Giza has sat there like an exhausted cat god, staring blankly into the horizon, contemplating eternity, or perhaps just wondering what happened to its nose. But beneath the familiar image of this half-lion, half-pharaoh enigma lies a controversy that's been quietly eroding the foundations of Egyptology. The question is simple. Why does the Sphinx look like it's been rained on? Geologists have noticed something odd. The body of the Sphinx is pitted and smoothed in ways that suggest water erosion, specifically heavy, sustained rainfall. That's strange, because the last time Giza saw that kind of weather was thousands of years before dynastic Egypt even existed. Like, this predates the invention of beer. Old. Mainstream archaeologists, protective of their timelines like toddlers guarding toys, argue the erosion must be from wind and sand. That's the traditional explanation. But water erosion leaves a very different mark-rounded channels, vertical fissures, a kind of geological melancholy that no amount of sandblasting can fake. If the water hypothesis is correct, then we have a problem. It would push the construction of the Sphinx back by several thousand years to a time when Egypt was supposedly nothing more than a collection of prehistoric campsites and proto-Ankh doodles. Which raises another question. Who built it? And if they were building monuments like this back then, why don't we see anything else from them? Some speculate the head was recarved much later, an old kingdom facelift on a monument far older. That might explain why the Sphinx's head is oddly small compared to its body, as if someone in 2500 BCE said, "Let's fix up this creepy lion thing and give it a royal profile." Also, can we do something about the nose? No? Okay, fine. The theory has not been embraced by everyone. Accusing ancient Egypt of being late to its own construction party tends to ruffle scholarly feathers. But even if the Sphinx isn't older than dirt, it's definitely weirder than we give it credit for. And it's not alone in its mysterious half-finished narrative. Just south of Aswan lies another massive monument that never quite made it to the stage, but left behind some telling scars in the quarry. The unfinished obelisk in Aswan. In the ancient granite quarries of Aswan lies a colossal regret. A monument so large, so ambitious, so clearly cursed by its own ambition that it never left the ground. This is the unfinished obelisk, an 1,200-ton beast of solid stone, still fused to the earth like it's trying to pull off a very slow jailbreak. If completed, it would have been the largest obelisk ever carved, taller than anything else standing in Egypt today. But instead, it remains horizontal, abandoned mid-process, like a group project no one had the heart to finish. The reasons? A massive crack appeared near its base during the carving process, rendering the whole thing structurally unsound. In other words, someone hit the granite jackpot, and then promptly ruined it with one chisel stroke too many. But here's what makes it so fascinating. The unfinished obelisk gives us rare, unfiltered access to ancient engineering techniques. You can see the trenches cut around its sides, the subtle tool marks from dolerite hammers, the careful planning that went into freeing such a monster from the bedrock. It's a frozen moment in architectural suspense, a suspended sentence in granite. What you don't see, however, are cranes, or pulleys, or any plausible method by which human beings in loincloths were planning to lift this thing, transport it down the Nile, stand it upright, and casually drop it in front of a temple without creating a national disaster. That's the other mystery. Even if the stone hadn't cracked, how exactly were they planning to move it? There are no surviving blueprints, no hieroglyphic instructions, no panic-ridden memos from ancient engineers explaining what they were thinking. Theories range from barges and sand ramps to the time-honored Egyptian tradition of, we don't know, but they probably figured it out. Whatever the case, the obelisk still lies there today, sun-bleached and motionless, daring every visitor to calculate the logistics. And if this failed mega-project isn't enough to make you rethink ancient precision, just wait until we look up not at the stones themselves, but the stars they were aligned to. Because when the temples of Egypt point skyward, it's not by accident. The methods for precisely aligning structures with astronomical bodies. So here's a thought to ruin your next stargazing session. Ancient Egyptian structures are often so precisely aligned with celestial bodies, you'd think they had a team of NASA interns working with stone compasses and divine GPS. The pyramids at Giza, for example, are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. The Great Pyramid's sides deviate by less than 0.05 degrees. That's not close enough. That's how the hell did they do that? Precision. Now, imagine doing that with no computers, no telescopes, no batteries, and no margin for error. Just math, observation, and a disturbing level of patience. Temples were also aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and the heliacal rising of Sirius the star, whose reappearance heralded the Nile's annual flood. Some temples are designed so that, on specific days of the year, sunlight pierces narrow corridors and lights up a statue in the inner sanctuary, like a religious laser pointer. All without messing it up by a single degree over millennia. It's as if the architects were designing not just for eternity, but for cosmic punctuality. And yet, we don't really know how they did it. Ancient Egyptian texts are frustratingly light on how-to guides, no surviving manual titled Celestial Alignment for Sacred Dummies. Just the monuments themselves, standing there smugly, daring us to decode their star maps. Some believe they used shadow-casting tools like gnomons and plumb bobs. Others think they tracked star movements over generations, noting the slow shift of constellations like a divine snail race. Still others suggest lost technologies, lenses, compasses, or something even stranger. What's more haunting is what these alignments might have meant. Were they guides for the soul's journey through the afterlife? Giant calendars? Messages to the gods? Or just the world's most overbuilt sundials? And if they were that obsessed with precision, on a cosmic scale, imagine what secrets they encoded in their writing systems like, say, the Rosetta Stone, which helped crack the code, sort of, but not completely. The nature and purpose of the Rosetta Stone and its limitations. The Rosetta Stone is the Beyoncé of ancient artifacts, so famous, so iconic, so over-referenced, you almost forget no one actually knows what its B-sides mean. It's the rock that launched 1,000 dissertations and made every Egyptologist feel like they were one cup of coffee away from fluently speaking to the dead. But let's not forget, the Rosetta Stone didn't exactly give us a crystal-clear instruction manual for deciphering ancient Egyptian culture. It gave us a trilingual tax form. Discovered in 1799 by French soldiers in Egypt, while digging a foundation for a fort because of course, the Rosetta Stone is inscribed in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. The idea was that by comparing the known Greek text with the mysterious hieroglyphs, scholars could finally decode a writing system that had been mocking human intelligence for over 1,000 years. And sure, it helped. Jean-François Champollion famously cracked the code in 1822, probably to the chagrin of rival scholars who were hoping hieroglyphs would stay cryptic so they could continue their careers as full-time guessers. But here's what the Rosetta Stone didn't do: explain the entire system. It gave us phonetics, how names and sounds were written. That's crucial. But the Egyptians weren't just writing sounds, they were writing ideas, layers of symbolism, contextual meanings, puns, poetic metaphors. The Rosetta Stone is like getting the lyrics to a song without any idea of the melody, the genre, or why someone's crying in the chorus. Also, The content of the stone? It's basically a political PR stunt, a decree from Ptolemy V reaffirming his royal divinity, tax breaks, and temple funding. It's a press release carved in stone. So while it unlocked the code, it didn't exactly open the gates to metaphysical enlightenment. Even today, there are whole sections of hieroglyphic texts that remain opaque symbols we can read phonetically, but whose meaning is a layered maze of religion, ritual, and riddles. It's like solving the alphabet but still not understanding the jokes. So yes, the Rosetta Stone helped us start the conversation with the ancient Egyptians, but we're still only halfway through the first sentence. Now, if you're tired of indecipherable documents, let's look at something ancient that makes perfect sense, a topographical map that charts gold mines with eerie accuracy, and yet still manages to be mysterious. The Turin Papyrus map and its depiction of gold mines. For a civilization known for building pyramids taller than most modern apartment buildings, the ancient Egyptians were shockingly humble when it came to bragging about their maps. But buried in the dusty archives of ancient papyri lies one gem that shatters that modesty: the Turin Papyrus map. This isn't just any map. It's arguably the world's oldest known geological and topographical chart drawn with such clarity and precision. It could pass for an early Google Earth sketch, if Google Earth was drawn on aged papyrus with hieratic script and the blood of cartographers. Dating back to around 1150 BCE, during the reign of Ramses IV, the map shows a region in the eastern desert, complete with winding wadi routes, mountain ranges, and annotations about gold mines. Not maybe there's gold here mines. We're talking specific labels that might as well say, "Dig here, you fool." But as with everything Egyptian, the clarity only leads to more confusion. The map doesn't just show the terrain, it includes details about stone types, religious significance, and even the names of deities associated with the landscape. It's part atlas, part travel guide, part religious tract. A divine GPS, if you will, that tells you how to extract wealth and appease the gods while doing it. So, what's the mystery? Well, for starters, it's incomplete. Sections are missing. The full context of why it was made, who used it, and whether it was functional or ceremonial or both is unknown. Was it a field guide for ancient mining expeditions? A royal propaganda piece showcasing the king's mineral assets? Or some priest's extremely detailed doodle? And here's the kicker. Despite its specificity, we still don't fully understand how the Egyptians mined gold at the scale suggested by this map. We know they did it. We have the jewelry to prove it. But the logistics, especially in such harsh, remote terrain, are still puzzling. So, the Turin map stands as both a marvel and a riddle, a piece of papyrus that seems impossibly modern and deeply esoteric at the same time. But if you think mapping gold in the desert is impressive, wait until you visit the Serapeum at Saqqara, where gigantic sarcophagi lie buried underground in granite vaults that no one fully understands, and no one really wants to move. The true function of Serapeums and the purpose of the massive sarcophagi. The Serapeum of Saqqara sounds like it should be a fancy Mediterranean nightclub, but it's actually one of the creepiest underground complexes in ancient Egypt, home to a long hallway of granite boxes the size of small trucks, buried in pitch-black chambers and aligned with suspicious mathematical neatness. Officially, these 24-ton sarcophagi were created to house the sacred Apis bulls, animals worshipped as incarnations of Ptah and Osiris. And yes, bulls were a big deal. They were divine symbols, ritually pampered, buried with honors. Think royal treatment with horns. But here's the problem. These sarcophagi are massive. We're talking single slabs of black granite so precisely carved that modern masons have openly wept trying to replicate them. The lids alone weigh up to 30 tons. The tolerance levels are absurd, almost machine-like. And moving them? Well, The chambers they're housed in are too small for any modern crane to operate in. So, unless ancient Egyptians were playing Tetris with tectonic plates, we're left with yet another case of, they did this somehow, let's all pretend we're not panicking. The mystery deepens when you open the sarcophagi. Some were empty, others held bull bones. Yes, but not always whole skeletons. Sometimes just fragments, and in some, nothing at all. Was it symbolic burial? A decoy? A riddle carved in stone, daring future archaeologists to make a fool of themselves? Alternative theorists, who always enter the chat right about now, have suggested the boxes weren't for bulls at all. Maybe they were meant for something or someone else, something bigger, something the priests didn't want walking around anymore. Official explanations say, no, these were Apis tombs. Case closed. But if that's the case, why go through the immense trouble of quarrying, polishing, and placing these absurd granite monoliths with such care for cows? There's a disconnect between purpose and execution here, like someone bought a Bugatti to carry groceries. It just doesn't add up. And just when you think granite sarcophagi can't get more mysterious, we zoom in closer on the actual tool marks, because the saws they were using weren't just sharp, they were something else entirely. The use of saws for cutting hard stone. Let's talk about ancient Egyptian stone cutting. Or, more accurately, let's scream quietly into the void about it, because that's what every modern engineer does when they see the tool marks on granite blocks from 4,000 years ago. Here's the situation. Egypt was obsessed with granite. They carved it, polished it, stacked it, and then smugly left it to stand for eternity. But granite is stubborn stuff, 7 on the Mohs scale. That's quartz-level hardness. And the tools Egyptians officially had? Copper, which is not quartz. Not even close. Try cutting a diamond with a spoon, and you'll understand the scale of the absurdity here. Yet the tool marks are undeniable. On obelisks, on sarcophagi, even on the walls of tombs. Circular saw marks. Deep grooves. Clean cuts with consistent pressure. Not the kind of damage a guy with a copper chisel and a strong work ethic produces. These look like the result of high-speed, rotary action machine-like precision, minus the machines. So what were they using? Some say sand-assisted copper saws. You get a copper blade, pour abrasive sand into the groove, and then spend the next 3 years sawing like your afterlife depends on it. It's technically plausible, but the consistency of the cuts? The depth and curve of some incisions? The speed it would require? That explanation starts to wobble like a pyramid on wet clay. Others point to bronze tools, dolerite pounders, advanced abrasives. Maybe they had a lost technique, something chemical, something vibrational, something our concrete-obsessed modern brains can't reconstruct. Or maybe they just figured out a way to turn granite into cooperative butter when no one was looking. The real kicker? In places like the unfinished obelisk quarry in Aswan, you can see the channels carved straight into bedrock, as if someone dragged a lightsaber through stone and called it a day. No jagged edges. No improvisation. Just precision and silence. And what do the ancient texts say about it? Nothing. No detailed guides? No instructions? No warning scrawled on papyrus saying, "Do not attempt granite before coffee." Just the end result. Blocks cut so well, they still defy time, gravity, and explanation. Which brings us back again to the Sphinx. Specifically, to a theory that won't go away. One that insists all that fancy erosion might not be wind or sand at all, but water. The water erosion hypothesis for the Sphinx. You thought we were done with the Sphinx? Oh no. The Sphinx is the gift that keeps on whispering, and its favorite rumor is that it's way older than Egypt wants you to believe. Enter the water erosion hypothesis, the pet theory of rogue geologists, a few archaeologists with raised eyebrows, and anyone who enjoys throwing a wrench into carefully built academic timelines. According to this theory, the deep vertical weathering along the Sphinx's body wasn't caused by the wind and sand of the Sahara, but by rainfall. Heavy, sustained, preposterously ancient rainfall. Here's the problem. That kind of precipitation hasn't graced the Giza Plateau since before 5000 BCE. That's thousands of years before Khafre allegedly built the Sphinx around 2500 BCE. So, either Egypt had a surprise monsoon no one documented, or the Sphinx was already chilling on the plateau long before pharaohs were even a twinkle in Ra's eye. Geologists who support the water erosion idea point out the rounded contours and deep fissures in the Sphinx enclosure walls. This isn't superficial damage. It's the kind of erosion you get when Mother Nature really commits. Not flash flood centuries of downpour. Mainstream Egyptology predictably rolls its collective eyes. It's wind erosion, they say. Soft limestone, harsh desert conditions, case closed. But they never quite explain why other nearby structures of the same period don't show similar patterns. Why does the Sphinx look like it spent a few hundred years sobbing in the rain while the pyramids next door look like they've never had a moist day in their life? Then there's the question of the Sphinx's head, comically small, possibly recarved, possibly hiding the original identity of the figure underneath. Was it a lion before it was a king? A pre-dynastic god? Or just a very, very early attempt at portraiture gone awkwardly wrong? Whatever the case, the Sphinx refuses to behave. It's older than it should be, more damaged than it should be, and suspiciously quiet about the timeline it wants to belong to. And if incomplete records drive you up the limestone wall, prepare yourself. Because next, we're looking at a historical document so tantalizing and so full of missing pieces it could drive an Egyptologist to madness. The purpose of the Palermo Stone and its historical gaps. The Palermo Stone is basically Egypt's attempt at keeping a royal timeline, and it's a hot mess. This black basalt slab, carved with the names of kings and records of significant events from the earliest dynasties, should be one of the most important historical documents ever discovered. Think of it as a royal scoreboard: kings, floods, wars, temple donations, agricultural events, all laid out neatly. In theory. In practice? The Palermo Stone is the ancient world's equivalent of a redacted government memo. The top is missing. The bottom is missing. Sections are cracked, faded, or completely obliterated. Of the original, believed to have once spanned several meters, only a few fragments remain, scattered across different museums, like the world's least satisfying jigsaw puzzle. What we do have offers tantalizing glimpses into Egypt's earliest rulers. There are names that don't appear anywhere else, mentions of obscure rituals, measurements of the Nile's inundation. It's one of the few direct records we have of the so-called mythical kings of pre-dynastic Egypt, those shadowy figures who may or may not have existed but somehow ended up on everyone's "do not question too closely" list. And that's where the mystery deepens. The Palermo Stone might contain the last surviving traces of a lost period of history, one that predates Narmer, the supposed first unifier of Egypt. But because we're missing so much of it, we don't know for sure. It's like finding page 4 of an ancient novel and being told to reconstruct the entire plot from a few names and some numbers. The real tragedy? There's no known way to fill in the gaps. No second copy, no companion text. Just a list of kings that cuts off midline, taunting scholars with its silences. Was this intentional censorship? Random decay? Or did someone decide history was better left ambiguous? Whatever the case, the Palermo Stone is a testament to the maddening inconsistency of the past. It offers just enough to intrigue and not nearly enough to understand. And if ancient surgical mysteries are more your style, then grab your scalpel. Because up next, we dive into the bizarrely advanced world of Egyptian medicine, where papyri read like ER manuals minus the anesthesia. The exact medical knowledge and surgical practices. Ancient Egypt, land of gods, gold, and good old-fashioned experimental medicine. If you think surgery is a modern invention, the kind of thing that needs sterile gloves and 12 years of med school, the Egyptians would like a word with a sharpened bronze knife and a handful of honey. Their medical knowledge was shockingly advanced. Preserved on papyri like the Edwin Smith and Ebers texts, we find treatments for everything from toothaches to battlefield trauma. And not just mystical chants, although there were plenty of those too, but practical, anatomical instructions. There are descriptions of brain injuries, spinal issues, broken bones, burns, and even the proper alignment of dislocated limbs. Imagine reading, "Push the jaw backward until it clicks," in cursive hieratic. This wasn't just herbal woo-woo. These people understood wound care. They used moldy bread for infection, basically early penicillin. They packed wounds with honey and resin. They stitched cuts. They even had rudimentary prosthetics like wooden toes for amputees. Functional, if not exactly fashionable. But here's where the scalpel slices into mystery. How did they know all this? They didn't dissect human bodies, at least, not openly. Religious taboos made corpse cutting a theological nightmare, yet somehow they understood internal anatomy. They knew the liver, the heart, the spleen. They knew how to treat wounds to the skull without assuming the patient was full of angry ghosts. One papyrus offers an eerily rational assessment of head trauma, including a note on checking for cerebrospinal fluid leakage. That's right, they knew about brain fluid. Was this knowledge handed down by generations of trial and error battlefield doctors? Or was it preserved from even older lost sources? The Egyptians attributed much of their medical knowledge to Thoth, the god of wisdom, which is poetic but not very helpful. And while they excelled in diagnostics and treatment, they were still a little shaky on cause. Most ailments were blamed on evil spirits, divine punishment, or a clogged channel in the body. Basically, ancient Egypt's version of blaming Mercury in retrograde. Still, their tools and methods were millennia ahead of their time. And yet, they vanished, lost in the sands, only to be rediscovered centuries later by scholars who realized they'd been reinventing Egyptian medicine all along. So while you're marveling at scalpels and sutures, glance up at the stone colonnades of Karnak where another mystery waits, balanced on the backs of pillars too heavy to explain. The Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak and its roof construction. The Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak is not just a room, it's a stone forest. A colossal limestone jungle where 134 massive columns stretch upwards like the bones of forgotten gods. Each one is so wide you could host a dinner party on top of it. And the roof they once held? A stone canopy so immense it made modern engineers sweat just looking at it? Here's the architectural riddle. How did they build it? Let's start with the basics. Each column rises up to 69 feet high. The central 12 are even taller, massive papyrus-shaped pillars crowned by floral capitals that support lintels weighing tens of tons. And those lintels? They're not placed gently. They're lifted onto the tops of these columns with a precision that suggests the Egyptians weren't just stacking stones, they were staging a silent miracle. And yet, no cranes, no pulleys, just workers, ropes, and what must have been an Olympic-level mastery of physics. The most common theory is that they built massive mud brick ramps, slowly elevating stones as they stacked higher. But the math is brutal. The scale of the ramp needed would be absurd, hundreds of feet long, packed with more bricks than the structure itself. It's the architectural equivalent of building a second temple just to finish the first. Even more mysterious is how they aligned everything so perfectly. The roof blocks fit like stone puzzle pieces, despite being placed dozens of feet in the air. No mortar, just gravity and impeccable design. Oh, and then there's the decoration. Hieroglyphs and vivid carvings were added after construction, meaning someone climbed up and chiseled fine art onto the ceiling without safety harnesses. Just another casual day in ancient Egypt. Defy gravity, carve godly murals, take a lunch break. And when that roof finally collapsed because of time, earthquakes, or maybe just ancient exhaustion, it left behind a haunting scene. Giant pillars reaching toward a sky they no longer hold, like stone ghosts begging to carry weight again. But While Karnak shows us how the Egyptians reached for the heavens, the next mystery reveals how they miscalculated just slightly and had to invent a whole new pyramid angle on the fly. The bent pyramid of Sneferu and its design changes. The bent pyramid is exactly what it sounds like. A monument that starts out ambitious and then halfway through decides, you know what, let's just chill. Commissioned by Pharaoh Sneferu around 2600 BCE, this odd structure rises at a steep 54-degree angle, then suddenly changes to a shallower 43 degrees, about 2/3 of the way up. It's the architectural equivalent of starting a sprint and then casually switching to a brisk walk when you realize you're out of breath. Why the change? The standard answer is structural concern. The angle was too steep. Cracks formed. Panic ensued. So, halfway through, they adjusted the slope to avoid collapse. Logical? Sure. Embarrassing for a pharaoh obsessed with grandeur? Absolutely. But here's where things get strange. The bent pyramid wasn't just a failure, it was a successful failure. It's still standing. It has smooth casing stones. It even has an internal structure more complex than other pyramids. It's got 2 entrances, 2 burial chambers, and a system of internal support that suggests this wasn't a rushed patch job, it was a rethink in real time. Some theorists suggest the change was intentional from the start, a symbolic gesture, a hybrid design representing heaven and earth, or perhaps an experiment. Sneferu was known for building multiple pyramids. Maybe this was him beta testing eternity. Others suggest it was a salvage operation. Sneferu was on a schedule. A pharaoh doesn't get to say, "Sorry gods, my pyramid isn't ready." So when the structure wobbled, they improvised an ancient pivot, if you will. But here's the real mystery. Why finish it at all? Why not abandon the whole thing, like other failed pyramids? The fact that it was completed, fully clad in limestone, and ceremonially sealed, implies it was considered good enough for royal standards, or possibly even revered for its uniqueness. The bent pyramid stands today like a shrug carved in stone, a rare, visible example of the Egyptians admitting, maybe we overdid it. And hidden deep inside another pyramid, the most famous one, waits a chamber so cryptic, so carefully avoided by the dead, it still refuses to give up its secrets. The Queen's chambers, in the Great Pyramid and their unknown function. Tucked deep inside the most famous pyramid on Earth, Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza, is a room that no queen was ever buried in, and no archaeologist has ever truly explained. They call it the Queen's Chamber, which is already a bad start, because no queen is associated with it, and its purpose remains the architectural equivalent of a shrug. This chamber sits roughly halfway up the pyramid's height, accessible by a narrow, sloped corridor that requires more humility than most modern researchers are prepared to express. It's modest compared to the king's chamber above it. Smaller, lower ceilings, no sarcophagus, just 4 bare walls and 2 enigmatic air shafts that stretch out into the stone and end nowhere. Or do they? The air shafts are the real rabbit hole here. Discovered in the 19th century, these narrow tunnels, about 20 centimeters wide, angle upward from the Queen's chamber at perfect geometric precision. Initially believed to be for ventilation, that idea was tossed aside once it became clear they don't open to the outside. Then came the astronomical theory that the shafts were aligned with specific stars, Orion's belt, Sirius guiding the soul of the dead pharaoh to his rightful place in the heavens. Except, again, this isn't the pharaoh's chamber. So if it's not a burial chamber, and the shafts don't ventilate, and it wasn't meant for a queen, what is it? Enter the robots. In the 1992nd and 2002nd, small robotic probes were sent up the shafts. One found a tiny limestone door with copper handles. Cue the Indiana Jones music. But when they drilled through it, they found another small stone, a dead end, or a deliberate seal, a message, a cosmic prank. Speculation runs wild. Was the chamber symbolic? A pressure equalizer during construction? A ritual room for transformation? Or something more esoteric like an initiation chamber for priests? Or a hidden repository of sacred knowledge? The problem is, the Queen's chamber doesn't tell us. It just sits there blank, silent, geometrically perfect, and dares us to make sense of it. And as you're contemplating mystery tunnels to nowhere, just remember, right outside the pyramid, buried in pits like disassembled IKEA furniture, are literal ships intended to sail the pharaoh into eternity. Ships so sophisticated, they raise more questions than they answer. The boat pits near the Great Pyramid. Boats. The ancient Egyptians loved them almost as much as they loved confusing future generations. They used them in life, in myth, and, apparently, in death, because buried beside Khufu's pyramid are massive pits that once contained fully functional, exquisitely crafted boats meant to ferry the pharaoh through the afterlife. The most famous of these is the Khufu ship, painstakingly reconstructed from over 1,200 wooden pieces discovered in 1954, packed into a rectangular pit like some kind of celestial IKEA nightmare. Measuring over 140 feet long, the ship is a marvel of ancient craftsmanship. Cedar planks held together, not with nails, but with rope lashings, designed to flex with the water, except this boat was never meant to touch the Nile. There's no sign it was ever used, no wear on the wood, no rudder installed. It was perfectly preserved, disassembled, sealed in a pit, and buried next to the pyramid as if Khufu needed a yacht ready to go for his interdimensional cruise. So what was the point? Some say it was purely symbolic, a solar bark, to carry the pharaoh alongside Ra across the heavens. Others believe it had ritual significance, may be used in funerary processions before being ritually retired. Or perhaps it was intended for the literal journey to the afterlife, which, in Egypt, apparently included first-class maritime travel. What complicates things is that there are multiple boat pits, some empty, some containing other dismantled vessels. Not all have been excavated. Not all are documented with the reverence they deserve. It's like finding garages around a pyramid, each with a slightly different ride like the pharaoh was prepping for different terrain. One for sky, one for the Nile, one for desert sailing just in case. And the Khufu ship itself is a technical mystery. Its planks are shaped with such precision that they fit without glue or metal fasteners. The wood was imported likely from Lebanon. The design? Nautically advanced even by Bronze Age standards. So, here we are again. Was this spiritual metaphor? Technological overkill? Or a hint that the Egyptians had a better grasp of sacred engineering than we credit them for? But let's say you've got your afterlife boat ready. What do you put in your burial chamber to make your eternal stay extra classy? Oh, right, a giant granite box. Too big to move, too empty to ignore, and too precise to be casual. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid and the sarcophagus. Within. Enter the king's chamber, the inner sanctum of the Great Pyramid, where Pharaoh Khufu was supposed to rest forever. And yet, the room is empty. No mummy, no treasure. Just a huge granite box that refuses to make sense. This sarcophagus, made from a single block of red granite, is positioned in the center of the chamber like an unanswered question. It's too large to fit through the passageways leading to the chamber, meaning it had to be placed there during construction. That alone is a logistical nightmare. You don't just shimmy a 40-ton coffin into place while your pyramid is half finished unless you're very sure it's not going anywhere. The granite came from Aswan, over 500 miles away, transported, carved, polished, and placed with a level of accuracy that still gives engineers heartburn. The interior angles are exact. The surface is smooth. No decorative inscriptions. No gilding. Just cold, raw stone, more math than myth. So where's Khufu? Some argue his body was looted in antiquity. Others believe he was never placed there at all, that the chamber was symbolic or empty by design. There are even fringe theories that the chamber was never a tomb, but an energy generator, a resonance box, a machine built to amplify consciousness, or perhaps just impress future tourists. Above the chamber are 5 relieving chambers, stacked one on top of the other, capped by massive granite beams. Ostensibly, these were meant to reduce the weight of the stone above the chamber and prevent collapse, which makes sense. But when you consider how much work it took to create them, you start to wonder if the Egyptians weren't just protecting the chamber, they were encasing something else entirely. The emptiness of the sarcophagus is what disturbs most visitors. This was supposed to be the climax of Egypt's greatest monument. Instead, it feels like a riddle carved in stone, echoing with silence. And if that wasn't weird enough, turn around and notice the fake door carved into the wall of many tombs. Not a passage, not a secret escape. Just a door for the dead one they were never meant to walk through, but somehow did. The false doors in tombs and their spiritual significance. Imagine being buried with a door that doesn't open. A beautifully carved slab of stone, polished and painted, often inscribed with prayers and titles, stuck right into the wall of your tomb. No hinges, no knobs, no passage, just a rectangle of holy deception. That's a false door, and to the ancient Egyptians, it was not just spiritual IKEA decor, it was a supernatural portal. These doors were meant for the dead, not in a zombie apocalypse sense, but in a very Egyptian one. They believed the soul, specifically the Ka, one of the several non-refundable parts of your spiritual anatomy, needed a physical doorway through which it could enter and exit the tomb to accept offerings, revisit the world, or maybe just haunt the living out of boredom. The false door wasn't just decorative, it was an interface, a metaphysical USB port through which priests and family members could offer food, incense, beer, and occasionally awkward chants. The Ka would receive these gifts by passing through the door, not in body, but in essence, because when you're dealing with metaphysics, real doors are just overkill. Most false doors were placed in the western wall of the tomb, facing the direction of the setting sun, symbolizing death and rebirth. Inscriptions listed the name and titles of the deceased, a menu of preferred offerings, and often a short resume for the gods. This is Ptahhotep. He was a vizier. Please feed him mutton forever. But here's the strange part. The door was usually the most prominent feature of the tomb, even when everything else was modest. Lavish carving, detailed lintels. Sometimes, even little offering tables set up right in front, like a spectral buffet line. And yet, no one really knows why the door had to be shaped like a door. Couldn't it have just been a symbol? Why so literal? Were they trying to trick the gods into thinking the soul had real mobility? Or did they believe there was another side, that the door wasn't false at all, just locked from beyond? The more we study them, the more they seem to mock our modern assumptions about ritual, utility, and the blurry line between architecture and theology. And while these spiritual doors served the dead, real doors were swinging across ancient kingdoms, as letters flew between kings, filled with gossip, threats, and more than a little confusion. The Amarna letters and their diplomatic intrigues. Welcome to the ancient Near East, circa 1350 BCE, where pharaohs, kings, and minor lords were all pen pals in a diplomatic drama more tangled than a soap opera written in cuneiform. The Amarna letters, a trove of over 350 clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Akhetaten, Pharaoh Akhenaten's short-lived capital, offer us a rare, almost uncomfortable peek behind the official curtain of royal diplomacy. They're written in Akkadian, the international lingua franca of the time, and they're not just bland memos. These are full-on rants, flattery fests, and panicked PL respond messages from vassal states. Some letters are shockingly petty. Kings complain they haven't received gold statues as promised. Others beg for military aid against rebellious neighbors. Some are classic, diplomatic, groveling. "To my lord, the sun from the sky, may you live forever. Here is a small gift of lapdogs and incense. Please, don't invade me." And then there's the juicy part. Letters from rival powers like Babylon and Mitanni, who try to finesse alliances through royal marriages, trade agreements, and a whole lot of passive-aggressive shade. One Babylonian king sarcastically asks why his gold statues look suspiciously like gilded wood. Another complains his daughter married an Egyptian king and was never heard from again. Honestly, it's ancient ghosting, and it stings just the same. But amidst the gossip lies something deeply unsettling. Many of the events described in the letters, raids, betrayals, the rise and fall of cities, aren't confirmed in any Egyptian record. It's like finding your nation's history in the private DMs of its enemies. The Egyptians didn't write this stuff down. The letters, in effect, expose the mess behind the myth. And then there's the ultimate irony. These letters survived not because anyone meant them to, but because they were discarded. Left in a government office after Akhenaten died, ignored, and eventually preserved in the dry desert soil. Bureaucratic flotsam turned archaeological gold. What they show is that Egypt wasn't a perfect empire. It was insecure, ambitious, occasionally hypocritical. The pharaohs were gods, but they still worried about their neighbors stealing wives and skimping on tribute. But if diplomatic embarrassments intrigue you, wait till you hear about an entire Persian army, tens of thousands strong, that supposedly marched into the desert and was never seen again. The lost army of Cambyses. Herodotus, that ancient master of suspiciously dramatic storytelling, once told a tale that sounds like the prologue to a sand-drenched horror movie. Around 524 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II supposedly sent an army of 50,000 men into the Egyptian desert. Their mission? To punish the rebellious priests at the Oracle of Amun in the Siwa oasis. Their fate? Vanishing. Completely. No survivors, no wreckage, just an army swallowed whole by the Sahara. According to Herodotus, the army marched from Thebes toward the west. After reaching the city of Oasis, they disappeared into the Great Sand Sea. One day, a massive sandstorm erupted and buried them alive. The ultimate timeout by Mother Nature. Of course, many scholars roll their eyes at the story. Too neat, too dramatic, too Herodotus. Ancient armies didn't just vanish, did they? But here's the twist. People have tried to find them. Over the past century, dozens of expeditions have hunted for skeletons, weapons, armor, anything. And while some have claimed to find arrowheads, bone fragments, or strangely arranged rocks, there's still no definitive evidence. It's as if the desert really did get the last word. What makes it all the more suspicious is that Cambyses himself was not exactly the poster child of sanity. Accounts describe him as increasingly erratic, killing his own brother, mocking Egyptian gods, stabbing the Apis bull out of spite. If anyone was unhinged enough to send an underprepared army into the deadliest terrain on earth just to win a theological argument, it was him. But what if the army didn't vanish in a sandstorm? What if it was ambushed, or defected, or turned into a story to cover up a military blunder? The ancient world was no stranger to rewriting failure as myth. Losing 50,000 men sounds awful. Losing them to the wrath of the gods? Now that's poetic spin. To this day, no army has ever been conclusively found. Just dunes and silence. And the haunting possibility that somewhere beneath the sand, tens of thousands of soldiers are still buried forever, marching toward a vengeance that never came. And speaking of strange things buried in tombs, how about baboons mummified, misplaced, and mysteriously important in ways we still don't quite understand? The true identity of the baboon mummies found in certain tombs. In the shadowy depths of Egypt's necropolises, surrounded by golden masks, jars of viscera, and more cat mummies than a pharaoh could sneeze at, archaeologists started turning up something peculiar. Mummified baboons, dozens of them, carefully preserved, ritually buried, and very much out of place. You see, baboons weren't native to the Nile Valley, not the kind they were mummifying. These were sacred imports, likely from the mysterious land of Punt, a place whose location is as debatable as the contents of an ancient scribe's lunchbox. That alone makes the baboons interesting. But what makes them bizarre is the degree of reverence they received. We're not talking incidental sidekick animals. These baboons got the VIP embalming treatment. Why? Well, it may all come down to a deity named Thoth. Often depicted as an ibis-headed god of wisdom, Thoth also had a baboon form. Yes, a baboon, the wise old sage of the jungle. Nothing says divine knowledge, like an animal that throws things when irritated. But in Egyptian theology, baboons represented balance, lunar cycles, and cosmic judgment. They were believed to greet the rising sun with ritual screams, or maybe they were just yelling for breakfast. Either way, it impressed someone. So, these mummified baboons, were they offerings, pets, divine incarnations? It's unclear. Some were found in proximity to priests, others in royal tombs. One famous specimen had its organs removed and placed in canopic jars, a practice usually reserved for humans. That's right, baboons with their own spiritual luggage. Even more suspicious, some baboon remains show signs of captivity, damaged bones, stress from poor diet or confinement. They weren't lounging in royal gardens. They were kept, controlled, and ultimately sacrificed. Was this devotion, exploitation, or just an attempt to keep a direct line to Thoth on standby? It gets better. Some texts hint that the baboons may have been trained. Not circus-level trained, but capable of ritual behavior. Imagine a troop of solemn baboons, bowing in rhythm, embodying lunar balance, while scribes awkwardly pretend it's all normal. Whatever the truth, these mummies raise more questions than answers, especially when you realize we can't even locate Punt on a map. So we've got foreign animals, divine symbolism, unexplained logistics, and no consistent reasoning for why someone would treat a monkey like royalty. And speaking of uncovering the daily lives of people who did all this, there's a whole village that left behind a paper trail so detailed, it makes ancient Egypt look suspiciously like a modern HR department. The Ostraca of Deir el-Medina and Insights into Daily Life. Welcome to Deir el-Medina, ancient Egypt's most exclusive gated community for tomb builders, where the stonework was top tier, the neighbors nosy, and the paperwork endless. Located on the west bank of the Nile across from Thebes, this village housed the artisans responsible for carving and decorating the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And boy, did they leave us a record. Not scrolls, not monuments, ostraca shards of pottery and limestone flakes used like ancient post-it notes, shopping lists, love letters, work logs, gossip, insults, strikes. Everything. These scribbled scraps reveal the kind of insight historians dream about. We know what they ate, lots of bread and beer, how often they skipped work a lot, and the reasons they gave for missing it. Hungover, wife gave birth, snake bite, didn't feel like it. It's basically an ancient bureaucratic sitcom, except it's all real. Workers at Deir el-Medina were well paid, literate, and organized. They had time off, sick days, and even took part in the first recorded labor strike in human history. When their rations were delayed, they staged a peaceful protest, sitting down at the royal tomb entrance and refusing to work until the grain delivery arrived. That's right, the pyramid builders had better union organization than some modern freelancers. But the ostraca don't just show the good stuff. They reveal interpersonal drama, accusations of theft, adultery, debates about who really broke that statue. One particularly delightful piece, reads like a passive-aggressive note left in a shared kitchen. He drank the beer, and now he lies about it. There are also accounts of dreams, superstitions, and prayers scratched into stone like desperate diary entries. People feared ghosts, appealed to local gods for justice. One man wrote a letter to the dead, asking his deceased father to stop haunting him. As far as we know, it worked. But for all this insight, there are still mysteries, gaps in the record, incomplete narratives. And the overarching question: how much of ancient Egyptian life looked like this, and how much was unique to this strangely transparent town? What's certain is this: Deir el-Medina brings ancient Egypt into uncomfortable clarity. It wasn't all gold masks and divine decrees. It was deadlines, family feuds, temple taxes, and tired workers just trying to get through the day. And as we shift from mundane to mystical again, let's travel back to the temple of a queen who ruled like a king and whose celestial carvings still defy full interpretation. The Hathor Temple at Hatshepsut's mortuary temple and its possible astrological significance. Queen Hatshepsut wasn't your average pharaoh. For one, she was a woman who ruled as a king, complete with false beard and divine bravado. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the most striking in all of Egypt, terraced, symmetrical, bold. But hidden within its grandeur lies a quieter, more cryptic place, the Hathor Temple, tucked to the side like a sacred whisper, and it might just hold the keys to the stars. Dedicated to the goddess Hathor, lady of music, motherhood, beauty, and ecstatic, cosmic weirdness, the temple is adorned with celestial carvings that many scholars believe hold astrological meaning. But the interpretations are all over the map, literally. Some see zodiacal symbols, others spot star deities. There are scenes of divine alignment and celestial processions that suggest more than just pretty decoration. Were these visual prayers, a calendar, a guide for the soul's cosmic journey? Or just Hatshepsut flexing her theological knowledge while the priests nodded nervously? What's strange is how the temple blends the solar cult of Amun-Ra with Hathor's more lunar, feminine energy. It's a fusion that doesn't appear many other places, an almost alchemical marriage of sun and moon. Was it a political move? A spiritual innovation? Or a message to future generations that power, like the cosmos, can't be divided neatly? There are also architectural alignments that hint at solar and stellar tracking. Certain light paths fall on specific carvings during solstices. Columns may be positioned to echo celestial events. And like every Egyptian mystery, nothing is labeled clearly, because the ancients loved ambiguity almost as much as they loved granite. To complicate things further, later additions and restorations have muddied the original intent. What we see today is a layered document, part authentic vision, part historical palimpsest. But the cosmic fingerprints are still there, in the patterns, in the symbolism, in the unsettling feeling that we're staring at a map we forgot how to read. So while the rest of the temple screams royal propaganda, the Hathor Temple whispers something subtler, something celestial. And if we could fully decode it, we might understand not just Hatshepsut's spiritual agenda, but how ancient Egypt really saw the stars. And speaking of confusing architectural statements, let's visit a mastaba that breaks all the rules, with features no one fully expected and meaning still locked in limestone. The mastaba of Hatshepsut and its unusual features. In the prestigious neighborhood of Abu Sir, where tombs were the original status symbols and funerary complexes were the ultimate flex, one structure stands out for breaking the rules with unnerving confidence. The mastaba of Hatshepsut. Not a pyramid, not a temple, just a mastaba, a big, flat, rectangular tomb, yet somehow stranger and grander than it should be. Hatshepsut wasn't a pharaoh. He was a high official during the 5th dynasty, married to a princess, close to the royal family, and apparently very into making architectural statements. His tomb is one of the largest non-royal mastabas ever built, and it includes features that make Egyptologists tilt their heads and mutter things like, "That's unexpected. For starters, the layout is oddly complex. It has multiple courtyards, colonnades, and chambers, including a massive pillared hall, an element usually reserved for temples or royal monuments. Then there's the sheer scale. The tomb was built with materials and techniques rivaling those of the king's own resting places. It even had its own boat pit. Yes, Ptahshepses apparently needed his own afterlife yacht, because clearly the celestial Uber pool wasn't cutting it. One of the most puzzling features is the use of architectural elements typically found in mortuary temples. Lotus bud columns, advanced stone-cutting techniques, and a level of design symmetry that feels almost mathematically obsessive. Was this just the ultimate act of elite self-branding? Or was Ptahshepses trying to send a message? Then there's the inscriptional oddity. His titles are listed with a degree of flourish that almost suggests divine pretensions. Not quite blasphemous, but audacious. It raises the question, was this man just really proud, or was there a deeper political undercurrent? A shift in how non-royals were allowed to present themselves in the afterlife. And let's not forget the mastaba's orientation. Some sections seem deliberately aligned with celestial markers, not just a nod to tradition, but a complex integration of space, symbolism, and star lore. A prelude, perhaps, to the kind of spiritual geometry that would define later Egyptian religious thought. So here we are, a tomb that's not just a tomb. It's a riddle in stone, shaped by ambition, wrapped in architectural eccentricity, a structure that blurs the line between official, royal, and divine. And if that's not enough of a prelude to mystery, let's rewind the clock even further to a time before pyramids, before mummies, when bodies dried under the sun and the dead didn't need tombs at all to become eternal. The Ghebeline man and the nature of pre-dynastic burials. Long before Egypt was Egypt, before papyrus records, before the pharaohs monopolized death like a spiritual brand, there was a man. We don't know his name, we don't know his story, but we know this: he died young, and he died violently. He was found in Ghebeline, an area south of Thebes, curled in a fetal position, naturally mummified by the dry desert sand, his skin leathery and brown, his hair still intact. His body preserved not by priests or chemicals, but by nature itself, raw, accidental eternity. But the truly disturbing part? He was stabbed. In the back, with enough force to puncture his shoulder blade and collapse a lung. Cause of death? Homicide? Victim of what? A fight? A raid? An early love triangle gone very, very wrong? He lived during Egypt's pre-dynastic period before formal burial customs were standardized, which makes his grave, or rather his shallow sandpit, an anomaly not just for its preservation, but for what it tells us or doesn't about the people of that time. There was no coffin, no elaborate ritual, no false door, no offering table, just a body, a pose, and the brutal simplicity of prehistoric death. And yet, in some cosmic twist, this man is better preserved than most New Kingdom nobles. His unplanned mummification outlasted 1,000 embalming oils and linen wrappings. This raises uncomfortable questions. Did the Egyptians start embalming because they wanted to preserve the body, or because they saw that the desert did it by accident and tried to imitate it? Even more intriguing, his burial wasn't unique. Other naturally mummified remains have been found nearby, suggesting an entire phase of Egyptian history where death was intimate, direct, and uncurated. No priests, no pyramids, just bodies and sand. And here lies the paradox. The further back we go, the less we know, and yet the more human it becomes. Without the gloss of gods and gold, we see the raw mechanics of mortality. A young man stabbed in the back, forgotten by time, until he was found again, intact and accusing. And if you think that's unsettling, wait until you see what the ancient Egyptians were burying next to their pyramids, Not humans, not animals, but wooden vessels large enough to sail the Sunday again, the solar barks at Abu Sir. By the time you reach the royal necropolis at Abu Sir, you'd think Egypt would have stopped surprising us with boat burials, but no. Here, next to pyramids that barely cling to their original grandeur, lie the fragmented remains of what were once great solar barks, giant wooden ships buried in pits, disassembled and hidden in plain sight. The solar bark was more than a symbolic vehicle. It was a sacred vessel, meant to carry the pharaoh's soul across the sky with Ra, the sun god, a divine commute, if you will. And in Abu Sir, these ships were clearly a standard part of the pharaonic afterlife package. You died, you got a tomb, and you got a boat. Afterlife, 101. But what's strange here is the pattern, or lack thereof. At Giza, the Khufu ship was buried intact. At Abu Sir, the boats were dismantled and laid in pits with a kind of chaotic reverence. Some were stacked. Some were scattered. Others appear to have been ritually killed, damaged deliberately before burial. Why? Was it symbolic? Like a Norse ship funeral in reverse, break the boat so the spirit can sail in the next world? Or were these just wooden kits waiting to be reassembled by ghostly shipwrights? Whatever the logic, the precision of their burial suggests this wasn't haphazard. It was ritual, controlled, intentional. Also curious, the wood used. Cedar, imported from distant lands, transported, carved, and dedicated to the afterlife. These weren't practical Nile canoes. They were ceremonial, deeply cosmological. The hulls were shaped for celestial travel, not river navigation. And here's a little twist. Some of these boats predate the burials they accompany, meaning they were used possibly in rituals then buried as sacred relics. Which raises a disturbing possibility. What if they were reused boats? What if one pharaoh inherited the afterlife transport of another? The solar barks at Abu Sir are fragments, now piles of timber and unanswered questions, but they reveal a belief system more maritime than we often acknowledge. Egypt wasn't just sand and sky. It was also river and sea, and stars reflected in water. And while we're dredging up sacred surprises, how about thousands of buried statues in one temple courtyard, like a divine clearance sale no one expected? The Kashet Court at Karnak and its trove of statues. If Egypt had a divine version of a spring cleaning, it happened at the Kashet Court of Karnak. Imagine the priests waking up one day, looking around at the temple, clutter hundreds of statues, offerings, sacred odds and ends, and saying, "Okay, we need to make room. Start digging." And dig they did. In the courtyard just outside the 7th pylon of Karnak Temple, beneath a surface once trampled by worshippers and pharaohs alike, archaeologists discovered one of the largest ancient Egyptian statue caches ever found. Thousands of objects, statues of gods, kings, priests, fragments of divinity and grandeur, buried like leftovers of a ritual banquet no one wanted to clean up after. But why bury them? Why hide hundreds of stone figures, many still intact, others deliberately broken beneath the temple floor? One theory is that it was a storage problem. As dynasties changed and temple renovations occurred, older statues fell out of religious or political fashion. A new king didn't want his predecessor's image hogging all the incense, so the priests quietly retired the outdated relics like obsolete relics in a cosmic HR file cabinet. Another possibility, ritual burial. Maybe these weren't trash, they were sacred, decommissioned properly. Sent into the earth like retired soldiers of the divine, no longer active in the temple but too holy to destroy outright. But here's what really complicates things. Some of the statues were pristine, royal, beautiful, still capable of drawing worship. Some even bore names of kings still in power during the time of burial. That's not just cleanup. That's a theological power move, or a reset button. Also, this wasn't a single dump. The cache was layered, stratified. objects from different time periods, different reigns, all laid down with a level of care that suggests ritual, not panic. This was curated chaos. And then, for centuries, silence. The cache remained hidden until the 20th century, when it was discovered almost by accident. Like the gods were trying to keep their retirement party private. So now, many of these statues reside in museums, removed from their mysterious underground slumber, separated from their siblings, divorced from their context. They still carry their divine weight, but the question remains, why were they buried? And by whom? And why in that particular courtyard? Speaking of sacred spaces, let's walk to the edge of Karnak and look down into a body of water that reflects not just the temple, but the mysteries of ritual itself. The sacred lake at Karnak and its purpose. At the heart of Karnak's sprawling maze of pillars, pylons, and hieroglyphic boasting sits something deceptively simple, a lake. Calm, rectangular, unnaturally still. It's called the Sacred Lake, and it's not just decorative. It's a mirror of the sky, of the temple, and of ancient Egyptian spiritual logic, which often swam deeper than we give it credit for. Constructed under Thutmose III, this man-made lake was fed by underground canals and maintained with surprising hydrological sophistication. No reeds, no wildlife, no chaotic waterline. It was controlled, tamed, ritual-ready. Its known function? Purification. Priests would bathe here before entering the temple, washing away the grime of the mortal world so they could deal with gods without embarrassing themselves. But is that all it was? Just a giant priestly bathtub? Unlikely. The lake's size and placement suggest symbolic importance. It wasn't tucked away, it was showcased, integrated into the temple complex's ritual architecture, a sacred void in the heart of the stone labyrinth. Some scholars believe it mirrored the primordial waters of Nun, the chaotic abyss from which creation emerged in Egyptian cosmology. In that sense, the sacred lake wasn't just for washing hands. It was a microcosm of the universe's origin, a still reflection of the first silence, before God spoke the world into being. And if you visited the temple at night, during certain festivals, you might have seen priests conducting ceremonies under the stars, lighting torches, chanting hymns, letting the sky reflect into the lake. Heaven above, heaven below. There's also speculation that the lake was used for astronomical observation. Reflected stars could be tracked in the water's surface, giving priests a way to map the cosmos without craning their necks. Or perhaps the lake served a calendrical purpose, marking solstices, equinoxes, or sacred alignments through reflections and shadows. But as with everything Egyptian, there's a gap between function and meaning. Was it practical? Yes. Was it symbolic? Absolutely. Was it both tied together in a knot of ritual so complex we may never fully untangle it? Definitely. The sacred lake still exists. Tourists walk around it. Birds float on it. But it rarely gets the attention it deserves. Just a puddle to most. A portal to those who know better. And just beyond this tranquil mystery lies a greater enigma, one that protected the capital itself. The shimmering, almost mythical, white walls of Memphis. The white walls of Memphis. Before Cairo, before Thebes, before every pharaoh started building their dream pyramid out in the desert, there was Memphis, the original capital of unified Egypt. And guarding it, shimmering in the desert light like a mirage turned to limestone, were the legendary White Walls. This wasn't just a poetic nickname. Early sources, Egyptian, Greek, and otherwise refer to Memphis as Ineb-Hedj, literally White Wall or White Fortress. A dazzling structure of blindingly bright limestone meant to defend the city, impress visitors, and probably fry the retinas of any invading army bold enough to look directly at it. But here's the problem. We don't know what these walls looked like, or where exactly they were, or even if they were walls, in the conventional sense. What we have are references, hints, whispers from texts and inscriptions, describing something unmistakable and now completely gone. Some scholars believe the white walls referred to the fortifications of the city, massive barriers made of limestone, reflecting the sun and the power of the state. Others argue it was metaphorical, a description of the temple precincts, the palace complex, or even the ceremonial structures of Pa, the city's patron god. There's also the tantalizing possibility that these weren't just protective structures, they were symbolic. White was the color of purity, of sacredness, of cosmic order. Were the walls designed to reflect more than light? Were they engineered to embody divine authority? Memphis was a city of firsts. First capital, first temple of Ptah, first place where Upper and Lower Egypt united, and yet today it barely registers. Buried beneath fields, modern villages, and centuries of neglect. No towering ruins, no flashy obelisks, just fragments and the memory of a city wrapped in radiant stone. Excavations have found hints, foundations, masonry that might be part of the ancient defensive network, but nothing definitive. Nothing that lets us point and say, there, that's the white wall Herodotus mentioned. So the myth persists, a lost shimmer, a capital that ruled the Nile and then receded into it. But if the crown of a city can vanish, what about its tip? Let's move from the walls to the very top, from the foundations to the glowing gilded apex of pyramids and obelisks, the enigmatic pyramidion. The pyramidion, atop obelisks and pyramids. In the age before skyscrapers and neon billboards, the ancient Egyptians had their own way of reaching for the heavens, and it came to a literal point. Enter the pyramidion, a small stone cap shaped like a miniature pyramid, placed at the very top of pyramids and obelisks. Think of it as the ancient world's exclamation point, a cosmic Wi-Fi antenna meant to beam the pharaoh's soul into the afterlife, or at least to look really impressive from a distance. But here's the problem. Almost none of them survive. These things were often made of limestone, granite, or even covered in gold leaf. They were designed to reflect the sun's rays, glowing like miniature suns atop massive stone mountains. The theory goes that they symbolized the Benben, the primordial mound that rose from the chaotic waters of creation. In essence, they weren't just architectural toppings, they were cosmological statements. Sunlight, eternity, divine presence, all condensed into a few feet of perfectly angled geometry. And then, they vanished. Most pyramidions are missing from their original sites. A few have been found scattered, broken, displaced, or dumped in museums far from their mountaintops. One wonders, were they stolen? Destroyed? Did they fall during earthquakes? Or were they deliberately removed when religious regimes changed and certain gods fell out of favor? It gets stranger with obelisks. The top of the obelisk is the pyramidion, and these, too, were often gilded, polished, and aligned with solar rituals. Obelisks were essentially giant sun needles, and their pyramidions were the spiritual syringes. Yet even in cases where the obelisks remain like those ripped from Egypt and sent to Rome, Paris, and New York, the gilded brilliance is long gone. We know they were symbolically potent. We know they were engineered with absurd precision. But we don't know exactly how they were placed atop these massive structures. The logistics are fuzzy. Were ramps used? Levers. Divine interns with wings? And then there's the real kicker. Some pyramidions are inscribed with texts and symbols that differ wildly from what we find below. Was the top reserved for secret messages to the gods? Elite-level prayers? Spiritual encryption? So, what remains today are mostly reconstructions, guesses, and fragments. A missing crown atop the most iconic monuments in history. And just below that missing apex, in the sands of Giza, lies a tomb belonging to a woman whose titles challenge everything we think we know about kingship. The tomb of Khentkaus I at Giza, and her unusual title. In a necropolis dominated by male names and towering egos, the tomb of Khentkaus I quietly whispers a question that Egyptologists still haven't answered. Was she a queen or a king? Her tomb sits at the edge of the Giza Plateau, nestled near the pyramids of Menkaure and Khafre, as if staking her claim among royalty. But what makes her burial truly unsettling is the inscription carved on her tomb facade: Mother of two kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, and King of Upper and Lower Egypt. Not queen, king. Wait, what? It's not just linguistic ambiguity. The title uses the exact same language reserved for male pharaohs. Her image, too, shows her wearing royal regalia. Not the soft, rounded iconography of a consort, but the bold, commanding posture of a ruler. In a world where kings were gods and queens were divine accessories, this breaks protocol like a chisel through limestone. So who was she? Most scholars believe she was the wife of King Shepseskaf and mother of Userkaf and Sahure, both kings of the 5th dynasty, but somewhere in that genealogical shuffle, it seems she may have ruled herself. A regent? A co-ruler? An independent monarch in her own right? Theories abound. Some argue that she ruled temporarily while her sons were too young. Others suggest she held enough religious power as high priestess to blur the lines between political and spiritual authority. A few dare to claim she was the real founder of the 5th dynasty, quietly rebranding Egypt's royal house while the men around her played at power. Her tomb architecture reinforces the mystery. It's a hybrid, part pyramid, part mastaba, neither here nor there. Like her title, it resists categorization. The causeway leading to it resembles those of full-blown pyramids, complete with valley temples and ritual halls. This wasn't a placeholder tomb, this was a royal complex. But over time, her name faded. Her legacy was dimmed, perhaps deliberately. History doesn't always like ambiguity, especially when it wears a crown. And just when you think you've found a stable royal narrative, along comes another woman buried with glittering treasures in a relocated tomb that raises even more questions than it answers. The tomb of Queen Hetepheres I and its intact contents. Imagine digging near the base of a pyramid, expecting sand, broken pottery, maybe the occasional bone, and instead finding a shaft leading to a perfectly preserved treasure chamber. No mummy, no body. But everything else? Gold, inlay, chairs, beds, and even a canopic chest still sealed with ancient resin. That's what happened in 1925, when archaeologists stumbled upon the tomb of Queen Hetepheres, mother of Khufu, wife of Sneferu, and the ultimate enigma in matriarchal burial history. Here's the twist. Her tomb wasn't where it was supposed to be. Most royal tombs of the 4th dynasty were built in prominent locations. Hetepheres' tomb? A shaft dug beside the pyramid of her son Khufu, deep, discreet, and hastily sealed. It felt like a reburial, an afterthought, a sacred cover-up. And yet, the contents were fit for a goddess. They found a gilded carrying chair, ornate furniture, golden jewelry boxes, and ceremonial vessels. Her canopic chest was still intact, filled with the preserved organs, but no sarcophagus, no mummy, no trace of her actual body. So the question is obvious. What happened to Hetepheres? One theory is that her original tomb, possibly near Dashur, was desecrated, and her burial goods were hurriedly relocated to Giza while her body was lost or destroyed. Another theory suggests that the tomb at Giza was meant to be symbolic, a cenotaph of sorts, preserving her memory and prestige while her actual remains lay elsewhere. And then there's the wild card. Maybe she was never buried. Maybe her death sparked a political crisis, and this tomb was a compromise, a ceremonial fix for a spiritual dilemma no one wanted to talk about. Her story, like her tomb, is full of absences. A queen with no remains, entombed in a place that defies convention, wrapped in treasures that suggest immense status, yet silenced by time. What's clear is that Hetepheres was no minor figure. She gave birth to Khufu, patron of the Great Pyramid. She was married to Sneferu, builder of more pyramids than any sane person should attempt. And she was revered enough to be buried with craftsmanship that still dazzles. But she also remains elusive, present in gold, absent in flesh. And if that doesn't say something about how the Egyptians viewed life and eternity, maybe the most mysterious symbol of them all, the Ankh, will, or at least pretend to. The Ankh symbol and its multifaceted meaning. The Ankh is the symbol you've seen 1,000 times without ever really understanding it. It's on tomb walls, temple columns, amulets, and t-shirts in questionable souvenir shops. It looks like a cross, with a loop at the top. An elegant, minimalistic design that somehow manages to say both eternal life and mysterious brand logo at the same time. The ancient Egyptians called it Ankh, and it's often translated as life. But let's not be fooled by that simplicity. This wasn't just a spiritual exclamation mark tacked onto funerary texts. The Ankh meant life, yes, but also eternity, divinity, fertility, power, and maybe something more abstract, like vital cosmic function that can't be put into words but should be carved on everything anyway. You see gods holding it, pharaohs receiving it, priests offering it. It's almost always in someone's hand or hovering near their nose. Yes, their nose. That's because it wasn't just symbolic, it was operational. The loop represented the breath of life, being held out like divine oxygen, a sacred puff, eternal CPR from the gods. Some have speculated the symbol represents a sandal strap. Others claim it's a union of male and female symbols, Isis and Osiris, literally embodying the fusion of opposites, creation through union. That theory may be poetic, but like many things in Egyptian theology, it blurs the line between anatomical metaphor and spiritual design brief. And then there's the material culture of the Ankh. They were made into amulets and worn by the living and the dead alike. Gold, faience, ivory, each version imbued with layers of meaning. Not just, may you live, but may your soul plug into the source code of the universe and continue endlessly like some divine USB drive. But despite all this visibility, there's no definitive explanation left behind. No instruction manual, no footnote saying, the Ankh equals X. Just endless repetition, endless presence. It's as if the Egyptians were telling us, you'll get it eventually, and then took the answer with them into the tomb. So the Ankh remains, a symbol of life that survives the death of meaning, a signpost pointing somewhere we can't follow, but are desperately trying to. And while we're on the subject of what the Egyptians packed for the afterlife, let's take a closer look at those cheerful, painted jars that once held all your squishy bits. You know the ones canopic jars, both practical and perplexing. The canopic jars and their contents. If you're going to be embalmed for the afterlife, you might as well have matching storage. Enter the canopic jars, ancient Egypt's most morbid, yet strangely adorable invention. These weren't just clay containers, they were celestial Tupperware for your vital organs. Set of 4. Limited edition. Contents may vary depending on dynastic trends. The idea was simple. Take out the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines because apparently those are the parts most likely to misbehave in the afterlife, and store them in separate jars, each protected by a specific deity. The brain, thrown away. The heart, usually left in the body, unless it wasn't. Because, of course, consistency is boring. The jars were personified with the 4 sons of Horus. Happy, baboon-headed. For the lungs, Duamutef, jackal. For the stomach, Imsiti, human. For the liver, Ankebe-Senuef, falcon. For the intestines. Each one had a lid shaped like their corresponding head, making the jars look like a demonic kindergarten class, guarding your guts with eternal vigilance. But here's where it gets weird. Not all canopic jars actually contained the organs they were meant to protect. In many tombs, the jars were found sealed and empty, or worse, mismatched. Some had shreds of linen, resin, or even symbolic representations of organs instead of the real thing, So was this a shortcut? A ritual substitution? Or had the embalmers run out of room? In later periods, the organs were often placed back into the body after being treated, but the jars were still buried with the deceased empty but present, like divine decoys. It suggests that the act of placing them in the tomb was more important than their actual use. Spiritual bureaucracy, if you will. And the design of the jars evolved too, from functional and utilitarian in the Old Kingdom to elaborate and decorative in the New Kingdom. Some were made of alabaster, others of wood, faience, or limestone. Always crafted with care, always positioned near the sarcophagus, and always facing forward watching. Canopic jars were more than vessels. They were contracts, promises, part of the operating system of the afterlife, where losing your liver was not a medical issue but a metaphysical crisis. And speaking of transporting precious things, let's follow the trail to a port that may have quietly powered one of the biggest mysteries of all: the logistics behind pyramid construction itself. The Wadi el-Jarf port and its role in pyramid construction. On the Red Sea coast, miles away from the glittering monuments of Giza, lies something far less glamorous but infinitely more puzzling: the ancient port of Wadi el-Jarf. No statues, no temples, no gilded death masks, just wooden boat planks, stone anchors, and stacks of papyri. But make no mistake, this dusty port may have been the engine room of the pyramid building machine. Discovered in the early 21st century and dated to the reign of Khufu, yes, that Khufu Wadi el-Jarf upended a century of assumptions. It provided physical evidence of how materials were moved across vast distances. But more than that, it contained the diary of an official named Mirror, a man who documented, with obsessive detail, how limestone blocks were ferried from the quarries of Tura to the construction site at Giza. Let's pause for a moment. The ancient Egyptians had paperwork for pyramid construction, and we found it. Mirror's logbook doesn't read like grand history, it reads like logistics. Loaded boat with stone, sailed upstream, unloaded at Giza. It's mundane, glorious in its tedium. But that's what makes it so revolutionary. It proves that pyramid building wasn't just magic or mystery, it was project management. But the site itself, Wadi el-Jarf, adds even more intrigue. It was a large-scale operation storage galleries tunneled into cliffs, pier structures, tools scattered like a worksite abandoned mid-shift. It was clearly crucial, but only used for a short time. So, why build it at all? Some think it was seasonal, active only when Nile conditions made inland shipping difficult. Others suggest it was part of a broader logistical web, a hub in an ancient supply chain that stretched from Sinai to Memphis. And then there's the real mind-bender. Why here? Why so far from the pyramid site? What other operations were being run from this remote outpost? The Wadi el-Jarf discovery pulls back the curtain on Egypt's engineering wizardry. It doesn't demystify the pyramids entirely, but it does something better. It shows us the hands that moved the stones. The schedules. The spreadsheets etched in ink and time. It's proof that mystery and management aren't mutually exclusive. And if you think logistics were sacred, wait until you see the paint palettes of the people who wrote the spells, chanted the hymns, and kept the sacred scrolls alive. The scribe's palette and its symbolism. If the pharaohs were the voices of the gods, the scribes were their translators meticulously recording decrees, rituals, grain tallies, and the occasional passive-aggressive note to the gods. And at the center of every scribe's toolkit was an object both humble and profound, the scribe's palette. At first glance, it's just a simple flat board with two depressions for black and red ink cakes, a groove to hold reed brushes, and usually some decorative flair depending on how fancy you were allowed to be. Functional, compact, and carried like a badge of professional pride. But the palette was more than a tool. It was a status symbol, a religious object, and in many cases, an offering buried with the dead to ensure continued literacy in the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, being a scribe wasn't just a job, it was a holy calling. You weren't just writing. You were participating in Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. By documenting events, prayers, spells, taxes, and temple inventories, scribes helped maintain cosmic balance. That's not exaggeration. That's theology. The palette itself became symbolic of that sacred duty. In tomb paintings, the palette is often depicted on altars or being held by scribes, offering prayers to Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. It represented not just literacy but access to sacred knowledge. In a world where 98% of the population was illiterate, being able to write was like having the keys to the kingdom and the god's voicemail inbox. Some palettes were personalized, inscribed with the names of their owners, prayers to deities, or miniature scenes of scribes at work. Others were purely ceremonial, never used, but placed in tombs or temples as symbolic tools, kind of like spiritual business cards. Hi, I'm Ramses, professional scribe, now hiring for afterlife documentation. And even in their form, the palettes hinted at deeper meanings. The black ink for general text, the red ink for warnings, corrections, divine names, or things that needed special attention. Life and death, creation and destruction. It was all in the ink, used sparingly, but with theological weight. So the scribe's palette, while compact, carried enormous significance. It was proof of civilization's heartbeat, proof that words mattered more than weapons, that the gods and the bureaucracy were always listening. And if the scribes were the sacred communicators, perhaps no symbol was more revered, more feared, more worn, more universally recognized than the divine eye that never stopped watching. The Eye of Horus and its protective power. There are symbols you see once and forget. And then there's the Eye of Horus, an ancient surveillance logo that's outlived gods, kings, empires, and now appears on everything from jewelry to conspiracy websites. But back in its prime, this symbol was anything but decorative. It was protection. Divine, mathematical, mystical protection. The Eye of Horus, also known as the Wedjat, represents the restored eye of the falcon-headed god Horus, who lost it in a cosmic fistfight with his uncle, Set, the god of chaos and general family dysfunction. After Set tore out his eye, it was miraculously healed and returned to Horus by Thoth, god of wisdom and part-time celestial medic. That's the story, but the symbol itself is a masterclass in metaphysical branding. It wasn't just a symbol of healing. It was used in amulets for protection, placed in tombs to guard the dead, inscribed on ships to guide them safely, and painted on coffins to ward off evil. It was the Swiss Army knife of divine symbols, good for the body, the soul, your house, your boat, and your afterlife journey. The Eye of Horus also carried mathematical significance. Each component of the eye was associated with a specific fraction, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, and so on, adding up almost to a whole. Almost. That missing sliver? Interpreted by some as a nod to the mystical, the unknowable, the divine remainder that logic alone can't explain. It's the ancient Egyptian way of saying, you're close, but not quite. And then, there's the placement. Eyes were placed on coffins, usually over the spot where the mummy's own eyes once were, allowing the dead to see into the next world. And on temples, the symbol was carved like divine CCTV, always watching, always protecting, or judging, or both. The eye was dual in nature, left and right. The left was the moon, the Wedjat, associated with Horus. The right was the sun, associated with Ra. Together, they saw everything. Night and day. Hidden and visible. The living and the dead. Today, it's a fashion item, a design, a conspiracy magnet. But at its core, the Eye of Horus is still what it always was, the thing that watches, protects, and reminds you that the gods were very aware of your behavior. And if symbols for eyes weren't cosmic enough, let's dive into one that speaks to the horizon itself, where sun and soul merge in an image both breathtaking and utterly inscrutable. The Akhet, horizon symbol and its cosmological interpretation. At first glance, the Akhet looks simple. A sun rising or setting between two peaks, usually stylized as a circle flanked by upward curving hills. It's seen in carvings, hieroglyphs, and sacred art, often as a backdrop to gods or pharaohs. But this little symbol contains an entire cosmology, a spiritual map of transformation wrapped in minimalist design. The word Akhet means horizon, but in ancient Egyptian thought, that horizon wasn't just a scenic sunset. It was a place, the threshold between worlds, a liminal zone where the sun died and was reborn. A cosmic door through which gods passed, souls traveled, and creation was constantly replayed on a loop. It was visual shorthand for duality, day and night, life and death, seen and unseen. The two peaks represented the mountains of the east and west, Baku and Manu, guardians of the solar passage. The circle in between? Ra, the sun god, embarking on his daily commute across the sky and nightly descent into the underworld. But Akhet wasn't just symbolic, it was architectural. The Great Pyramid at Giza was originally named Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. The entire structure was designed to embody this idea. The pyramid was the horizon, where the pharaoh would become one with Ra and be reborn each day with the Sunday. It's less a tomb, more a cosmic launch pad. In temple reliefs, you'll often see the Akhet framing sacred events, coronations, rebirths, the divine cycle of order returning after chaos. It's not a background, it's a stage. The sacred setting where reality itself is made and remade. And like everything in Egypt, the symbol is layered. Some believe the sun between the peaks represents the soul's journey rising from death to eternal life. Others say it's a clock, marking the turning of celestial time. Or maybe a map, pointing to the real places on earth where the gods were believed to live. But the real mystery? It shows up everywhere, yet is never fully explained. No surviving text unpacks its full meaning. It's intuitive, poetic, powerful. A symbol that asks you to feel, not translate. And if you think the soul's journey through the horizon was complex, just wait until you meet the soul itself, or rather, the two parts of it, doing a spiritual two-step across dimensions. The Ka and Ba, concepts of the soul, and their interplay. In the ancient Egyptian metaphysical model, dying was the easy part. The real challenge came afterward when the self fragmented into multiple pieces, each with its own itinerary, spiritual baggage, and cosmic paperwork. Among these parts, two stood out like twin stars in a mythological constellation, the Ka and the Ba. Let's start with the Ka. Think of it as your life force, your essence, your spiritual doppelganger who eats ghost food in the afterlife and insists on having its own personal statues. It was born with you. It needed nourishment offerings, rituals, affection. It was you, but not quite. Like a roommate who shares your aura, but is far pickier about bread and incense. The Ba, on the other hand, was your soul in motion, your personality, mobility, and post-mortem flair. Depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba could leave the tomb, visit relatives, fly through sacred landscapes, and return by nightfall. It was your true self with wings, a spiritual traveler maintaining your social calendar long after your heart had stopped beating. But here's the catch. The Ka and Ba couldn't just wander off independently forever. At some point, they had to reunite, merge into the Ak, the effective being, the immortal self that would endure in the field of reeds, basically Egypt's heavenly retirement community. This reunion wasn't automatic. It required rituals, proper burial, spells from the Book of the Dead, and enough family devotion to keep a small army of priests employed. And if you messed up? If the body was destroyed, the name forgotten, the ritual skipped, then the Ka starved, the Ba got lost, and your soul fractured into eternal homelessness. Even divine insurance couldn't cover that. This spiritual anatomy wasn't just symbolic. It shaped architecture. Tombs had serdabs, sealed chambers with statues to house the Ka. False doors allowed offerings to pass through. Ba birds were painted, soaring above the mummy, returning at dawn like ethereal pigeons who missed their flight the night before. It's beautiful, tragic, and wildly complex. A belief system where your identity was a delicate balance, not a monolith, where you had to be remembered just right or risk metaphysical obsolescence. And speaking of sealed chambers and statues, let's walk into the heart of the pyramid once again, where the serdab awaits in silence, holding the gaze of a spirit still watching. The serdab chamber in Pyramids and its purpose. Tucked inside tombs and pyramids, hidden behind stone walls with only a thin slit for air, or perhaps for vision, sits one of ancient Egypt's most haunting architectural enigmas, the serdab, a sealed room, no doors, no entrances, just one or two small eye-level openings and a statue locked forever inside, staring out from the dark. The word serdab means cellar in Arabic, but in ancient Egyptian design, it was anything but utilitarian. This chamber held the statue of the deceased, usually lifelike, eerily expressive, often carved from limestone or wood, and served as a spiritual backup plan. If the mummy failed, if the Ka got disoriented, if the body decayed too much for comfort, the statue would act as a surrogate, a vessel for the soul. Think of it as a cosmic insurance policy. In the event of body failure, please redirect all offerings to this replica. But what really mystifies scholars is the architecture of the serdab itself. Why the sealed room? Why the tiny eye slits? Was it about protecting the statue? Or letting the soul observe the rituals without being disturbed? Could the spirit see through the statue's eyes? Was it one-way divine surveillance? In royal tombs, the serdab is positioned with precision, often aligned with processional paths or celestial events. The statue would gaze out into space it could never enter, watching the world carry on without it, receiving incense, prayers, bread, beer, and the occasional goat leg with grim dignity. The emotional charge of these rooms is intense. The combination of lifeless stone and implied consciousness creates an uncanny presence. Walk past the slits, and you feel it. The gaze, quiet and unblinking. Not threatening, but aware. Some believe the serdab also served as a kind of communication device, that the soul, watching through the statue, could receive not just food, but messages, prayers, updates, maybe even family gossip. Others argue it was more about power, reinforcing the deceased's continued presence, their undying connection to the temple and the land. Whatever its purpose, the serdab blurs the line between object and observer, between the living and the still watching dead. And if you think silent chambers are eerie, try measuring the pulse of the Nile itself, because the ancient Egyptians built a whole instrument for that, and somehow it worked. The Nilometer measurements and their accuracy. Long before satellite imaging, weather apps, or angry farmers tweeting about floods, the ancient Egyptians had a system for measuring the lifeblood of their civilization, the Nile. And to do that, they built the Nilometer, a tool as elegant as it is mysterious. At its core, a Nilometer is a glorified water gauge. Stone stairs, pillars, or vertical shafts marked with calibrated notches to record how high the river rose during annual inundations. Too low? Famine. Too high? Devastation. Just right? Harvests, taxes, and pharaohs claiming divine favor. But here's the uncanny part. The Nilometers worked. They weren't just symbolic. They were accurate. They tracked fluctuations in water levels with astonishing precision. And these readings were used to forecast agricultural output and, more cynically, to determine how much tax you owed. Because nothing says divine order like calculating your grain tithe based on a river's mood swings. Some of the oldest known nilometers are at Elephantine Island, Cairo, and Kom Some are deep stone wells, others wide staircases that descend into the Nile. They're all functional, architectural hybrids, part shrine, part instrument, part bureaucratic trap. And they weren't just hydrological curiosities. They were sacred. The Nile's rise wasn't a weather event, it was a godly performance. Hapi, the Nile deity, was praised and placated through ceremonies tied to the river's rhythm. The Nilometer readings weren't just numbers, they were omens, divine data. But how did they calibrate them? Who decided what height was optimal? And how did they account for regional differences along the Nile's path? The answers are as murky as the river in flood season. Even stranger, some nilometers have inscriptions referencing ideal flood levels, suggesting someone had done long-term data analysis, by observation or by inherited knowledge, long before data analysis was even a concept. Did priests keep records year after year? Did temple economists develop algorithms before algorithms were cool? It's both impressive and mildly terrifying that they could read the rise and fall of a river, interpret it as a divine message, and then build an entire civilization's agricultural and fiscal policy on top of that. So, while it may look like a glorified stairwell today, the nilometer was once a precision tool of empire, a place where nature, divinity, and bureaucracy converged. And speaking of converging empires, let's end where the sands bury secrets, monuments relocate, and cities rise from the echoes of older greatness, the lost capital of Tanis, the lost city of Tanis, and its parallels with Thebes. Tanis. The name sounds almost invented, like something out of a pulp adventure serial or a half-remembered myth, which is fitting, because that's exactly how history has treated it. Once a grand capital of Egypt, filled with temples, royal tombs, and monuments worthy of gods, Tanis today is little more than a field of broken stones and archaeological migraines. Its grandeur buried not just beneath sand but beneath confusion. Here's the thing about Tanis. It wasn't supposed to be great. It wasn't Thebes. It wasn't Memphis. It wasn't even on the spiritual shortlist. But in the wake of shifting politics, religious divides, and inconvenient invasions, it rose somewhat awkwardly to take center stage. What makes Tanis especially strange is its Frankenstein-like construction. Much of its greatness wasn't built from scratch. It was transplanted. Entire monuments, obelisks, statues, and sacred objects were brought in from older cities like Pi-Ramesses, Thebes, and Heliopolis. It's as if the priests and kings in charge looked around after the political fallout of the new kingdom and said, "Quick, grab anything not nailed down. We're building a new capital." Why? That's still debated. One theory is that the shifting course of the Nile left Pi-Ramesses landlocked. A capital with no water access? Politically dead. So the ruling elite relocated, repurposing its monuments and replanting its temples like sacred shrubs in a new garden. But that creates a problem. You end up with royal tombs at Tanis containing monuments with other pharaohs' names. Sarcophagi, originally carved for long-dead kings, reused for newer rulers. Gods housed in temples meant for other cities. It's a glorious mess of repurposing, religious continuity, and royal identity crisis. Tanis was the seat of the 21st and 22nd dynasties, including kings like Susen I, whose burial, discovered in the 1932nd, is one of the richest ever found, complete with a solid silver coffin and gold mask, and yet most people have never heard of him. Why? Because he's not buried in the Valley of the Kings. He's buried in Tanis, under ruins, in a city that history seems determined to forget. Even in its architectural layout, Tanis mirrors Thebes' two halves, divided by water, sacred zones, temple alignments. It was like a Thebes 2.0. But imitation, no matter how grand, never quite matches origin. So Tanis stands as the final contradiction in our journey, a capital city that rose from the bones of others, rich in treasure, but poor in legacy, grand, yet ghosted, a place built to preserve Egypt's fading glory, and now buried beneath the very sand that once defined it. It is the perfect ending to a civilization obsessed with permanence and haunted by disappearance.